In my last Roblox devlog, I created a new world for blockyroll which implemented some new and interesting features, and then I got yelled at by some people because the update never released. I added rotated boost pads, kill barriers, and my favorite feature of them all, bounce pads, which actually still need some work before they're perfect. It was a really fun update to develop, but I still have some work to do before it's ready, and there's still more features I want to add before releasing the update to the public. In this devlog, I'll be creating a brand new sandbox level where players can test out all the mechanics in the game and practice their speedrunning skills. Now, if you haven't watched my previous blockyroll devlogs, I highly recommend you go check them out on my channel. They'll give you a lot more insight on where I am in development, and you'll get to see how the game looked before. I'll also be adding some extra features and changes that'll make blockyroll a lot more exciting overall. But without further ado, let's look at everything that's changed in blockyroll. So in game development, it's really important to consider the feedback of your players. When I released the first versions of blockyroll on Roblox, I got a lot of feedback saying that the first world was a huge step up from the tutorial. Now I'll be honest, I kind of did expect this. Back when I first started working on blockyroll, World 1 was not made to be a beginner level, it was only made to test out the mechanics of the game. But now that it is the first world in the game, I made some pretty big changes to make sure that the level isn't too difficult for beginners, but still charmingly annoying to beat. I completely removed the final section of World 1 to make the world significantly shorter, I improved the consistency of some jumps at some areas, and I made the overall level design a lot more linear and consistent. My plan for the future is to have a map designer add meshes and designs to the level so it doesn't look so blank and so the level has its own personality. My hopes with these changes is that the level will be a lot easier to approach and complete for beginners, but with the next worlds, I don't think I'll be so kind. I want to start getting to work on the sandbox level, but I need to figure out how the level will actually look before I start developing it. There's a lot of possible level combinations in blockyroll, and there's many strategies that can be used with each one, so I want a sandbox level that can attempt to encompass almost all the most commonly used tactics into one level. Think of things like bouncing after a slide, recovering mid-launch, keeping your momentum, common tactics like that. These should all be available to practice in the sandbox. I also want to make sure that every feature is available in the sandbox as well, like the launch pad, boost pad, bounce pad, and a few other future movement devices that I won't reveal just yet. For the sandbox mode, I decided to go with a very open and grassy landscape to represent the vast possibilities for experimentation and practice. My idea was to have some sort of central area, with launch pads that could send the player in 4 different directions, each leading to a different section of the sandbox course. The entire sandbox course would be interconnected, so there's no real start or end to the course. I can actually see Sandbox becoming a very fun map to just race your friends on. I actually even considered adding player collisions, but I guess we'll leave that for a future update. After establishing the idea for the Sandbox world, I got straight to work. I tried adding as many of the features from other worlds to Sandbox to allow the player to practice their speedrunning skills, but I do think I might have missed a few things. To help myself build the level more efficiently, I created a system which allows me to preview the trajectory of each movement device. Things like launch pads, bounce pads, boost pads, and ramps now have a yellow line while I'm developing to help me figure out where to place the next obstacle. This system actually doesn't include any fancy calculations. I actually just use my path debug dev tool to map out the trajectory the player would most commonly travel when using the movement device, and then I made Bezier curves to represent the most common trajectory. I think it helps out a ton for me personally, and it allows me to develop worlds even faster. As I was finishing up one of the slopes on Sandbox, I noticed a very weird collision glitch. It seemed like sometimes, at random, the player would bounce off a seemingly invisible part of the slide. This didn't happen all the time, but I had a good idea of what was causing it. Due to the extremely sharp corners and edges of the player model, the geometry of the player would sometimes poke the slide, which would cause the player to abnormally bounce in some direction. This was not intended at all, so I decided to slightly round off the edges and corners of the player model. I made sure to only round off the player by a very slight amount because I wouldn't want it to take away from the fact that the game is challenging because you're a cube. But at the same time, I didn't want the game to be inconsistent, which is exactly what these sharp corners were causing. Rounding off the corners and edges of the cube seemed to work like a charm in fixing the issue. Sliding down slopes was a lot more fun now, and importantly, a lot more consistent. Speaking of tools to help development, I actually added some developer exclusive features to my game to help me playtest even faster. The first thing I added was the ability to teleport by pointing some mouse at some surface. This allows me to teleport right to an area where I need to test some sort of mechanic or code, and it makes my life 10 times easier. I also added the ability to become a rainbow cube because why would you not want to become a rainbow cube? In the end, I finished developing about 1/4 of the total Sandbox course, which took around 13 hours. I really wanted to get the rest done, but I did want to get a quick devlog out first. I hope to add the rest of the Sandbox course soon, but it is still tons of fun to play in its current state. In my last devlog, I actually showed a current state of World 3. It seemed to be essentially complete, but there were still a few things missing that I had to work on. The most important feature I needed to finish was the bounce pad. The bounce pad worked, but it didn't look good. It kind of just flung the player upwards with no sound cue, no visual cue, and it just looked a bit tacky overall. Before World 3 could even be published to the game, I needed to make the bounce pad look a lot better. I started by just toning down the effects that emitted from the top of the bounce pad. They looked okay, but I think a sort of pulsating effect looked a lot better than what it previously was. The bounce pad was also just a bit too green, so I decided to adjust the center to be a darker color. I left the neon rim alone since I thought it was fitting for the bounce pad. Now that the visual design was nice, I went ahead and added a sound cue, as well as a visual cue for when the player bounced off the pad. I think these changes make the bounce pad a lot more intuitive and visually pleasing, which I was happy with. But during testing, I noticed that sometimes the bounce pad would just fail to bounce the player at random times. I wasn't quite sure what was causing it, so I did some digging. It turns out I've been using an invisible outer part to detect any collisions the player was having using the touched event. Now, if you're a Roblox developer, you already know why this is a problem, but if not, let me explain it. The touched event can be very inconsistent in Roblox. If an object is moving fast, the touched event probably won't trigger. If an object is already touching another object, the touched event probably won't trigger. If the player even has a low frame rate, the touched event probably won't trigger. I needed to find a better solution. If you watched my custom hours host devlog, you'll know that I ran into a similar issue where I needed an effective collision detection system. In that video, I used an open source system called Raycast Hitbox to fix my issues. This system essentially allows me to designate specific points on the model, and the system will draw a line from the beginning frame to the end frame and tell me if those lines hit anything. This system is extremely effective because it uses the same collision detection that first-person shooter games use to detect bullet collisions with players. The new system ended up working perfectly and detected fast collisions much better than the previous system. I did make the player hitbox a bit more lenient because I think it's better for the player to think, how in the world did I hit that bounce pad, rather than thinking, why didn't I hit that bounce pad? It just results in a little less frustration, which might be a little counterintuitive for the style of the game I'm going for. Now that I had a new collision system, 2 new worlds, and a new movement device, I think the update is ready for release. There were just a few small quality of life features I wanted to add before I released the update. The first small feature I added was remastered effects. This was actually never planned, but almost all of the effects in blockyroll kind of just stopped working for some reason. So I took advantage of this moment and made some stunning new effects that, in my opinion, look a lot better than the previous effects. I also changed the UI elements so they no longer need to be right-clicked on them to interact. The game now detects if your mouse is hovering over a UI element and disables rolling while you click. I switched the lighting engine from shadow map to future, which, if you don't know what that means, it pretty much just makes the lighting in the game look a whole lot better. I also thought I fixed a bug where you could see players in other worlds, but apparently I didn't test it thoroughly enough because you can still see them. I'm hoping to fix this in just a quick hotfix later on. Now, with all of these new features added, I went ahead and published the update. I do have a lot of future plans for blockyroll, but for the near future, I might be moving on to different projects like the custom hours host, but I may return to blockyroll someday for another update. If you enjoyed this devlog, please be sure to check out the other ones on my channel. You can play the latest update of blockyroll right now on PC with the link in the description, where I'll be playing for the first few days. I promise mobile and console support will come very soon. It was really fun adding the new worlds and features to the game, and I hope you guys enjoy them just as much as I do. I'm usually Reggie, and I'll see you guys in the next one.